Welcome, friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what Camels can do for you. Remember, folks, when America was the greatest nation on the face of the earth, Camels were America's #1 selling brand. The generation of Americans that smoked Camels was called the Greatest Generation. These were the Americans who lived through the Great Depression and World War II. So if you're feeling anxiety about World War III and our coming extinction, do what Grandpa did. Light up a Camel's. Nothing goes with anxiety quite as well as a Camel's. Well, my friends, it's been another week of very bad news. And speaking of the Great Depression, The Economist reported last week that America's fiscal outlook is disastrous, with even less attention being paid to the than being paid to global climate change, rising violence, the opioid crisis. The state of the world economy is just as apocalyptic. While concern about deficits and debt have all but vanished from the American politics, The Economist reports that in 2024, the US must roll over about a third of its existing debt. And to do that, they have to find buyers for $10 trillion in bonds. And the scale will increase from year to year. All of this borrowing has eased America's economic crunch, but put the rest of the world at risk. Uh, Last month, CNN carried an amazing story from the World Economic Forum, headlined High Chance of Global Catastrophe. According to the report, humanity faces a perilous future marked by an explosion of disinformation turbocharged by artificial intelligence and the devastating effects of climate change. This gloomy outlook comes from the annual survey of the World Economic Forum of people who are paid to identify and manage global risk. According to the report, nearly two-thirds of the respondents expect an elevated chance of global catastrophe in the next decade, with about 30% of them expecting it in the next 2 years. A global catastrophe is an event defined as something that would negatively impact the global population and world natural resources. In a statement, the WEF warns of a global risk landscape in which progress in human development is being chipped away, leaving states vulnerable to new and insurgent risks. The survey highlighted the predominantly negative outlook for the short term and expected the outlook to worsen in the long term. To sum up, the short-term outlook is terrible, and the long-term outlook is even worse. The report comes ahead of the WEF's glitzy annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, and is based on the responses of 1,490 risk experts, primarily from business, but also from academia, government, and civil society. The survey was launched on September 4th and closed October 9th, 2023, 2 days before the terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. Which brings us to the subject of this week's show, violence and rage. When I first learned about the atrocities of the Shoah and the continued existence of anti-Semitic movements and ideas, I felt rage. I think rage is a natural reaction you have when you find that your family, people you love, have been assaulted, raped, and murdered. You don't want to talk to such people. You just want to kill them. So I understand the leader of the Columbia encampment saying that the Zionists don't deserve to live. He also compared Zionists to white supremacists and Nazis. These are the same people, he said. And so, yes, I feel very comfortable calling for these people to die. I felt that way. It took a long time for the rage to calm down. In fact, for most of my career, the engine that fired my passion was rage against injustice, which touched me personally. I saw it everywhere, and it was infuriating, especially as I was a bystander, a witness to all the brutality. What we are witnessing today is the escalation of rage in response to violence. It helps explain why so many Americans see violence as the only option moving forward. The mainstream of the Jewish community are experiencing rage over October 7th, at the same time that we are witnessing an escalating rage among Palestinians and their supporters who are witnessing the deliberately imposed suffering upon the Gaza population. The Jewish community has little compassion for starving children in Gaza, and the supporters of Hamas have little compassion for the rape victims of October 7th. The violence is consuming us all. So last week we saw these massive demonstrations at Columbia University spreading across the country, Bernie Sanders said that the students were on the right side of history. But if you acknowledge that we are on the verge of extinction, the students are outside of history, pretending or deluding themselves into believing that the most important ethical issue of the day is Gaza, rather than Sudan or Extinction Rebellion. Now, I was in New York, a student radical in 1968, when the students took over Columbia University campus. But that was the Vietnam War, and we were protesting. What we objected to was the government sending us to Vietnam to die. We also then really thought that we had a future. The draft got our attention. But what is it about Gaza that has so captured students' attention today? Jews have always been the canary in the mine. I went to Israel in 1967 as a volunteer in response to the June War. I have very vivid memories of the surreal feeling of walking on the streets of New York as the war approached. I couldn't believe that people could actually be still drinking coffee and going to work while Israel was being threatened with annihilation just 20 years after the Holocaust. The good news is that since then, I've learned how one can drink coffee while waiting for annihilation. And nothing goes with coffee while waiting for annihilation quite like a camel's. So until next week, take the Camel's Challenge, have a cup of coffee, and hopefully I'll be back next week with another edition of more bad news.